Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about. First of all, we're going to talk about CIGS and the PV market as a whole, then look at our nanomarkets forecasts for CIGS, then explore somewhat what the industry structure is, who's supplying what and how they're building their panels. And then we're going to take an excursion into manufacturing, because this is where nanomarkets believes essentially where competitive advantage is going to come to for CIGS down the road. So a little bit about substrates and cell architectures. These turn out to be important too, and then conclude the talk. But beginning, going on to the next slide, the basic value proposition for CIGS is really what you should keep in mind throughout all of this. There's a kind of tension in the PV industry between crystalline silicon PV, which gives pretty good efficiency, and thin film PV, TFPV in our lingo, which gives advantage over, or at least potentially, on cost, flexibility, weight, and manufacturability. What CIGS seems to do, and it's yet quite some way from achieving its goal, is to bring those two things together, to bring efficiencies which are close to crystalline silicon, and at the same time offer the thinness, if you will, of thin film PV. As you'll see, we're some ways from achieving that goal, but that's the goal that CIGS holds out and its competitive advantage in the marketplace. Moving on, again, really just looking at how CIGS fits into the whole PV area. At the top, you've got a couple of compound semiconductor technologies, particularly gallium arsenide, that really meet very specialist needs in aerospace. Gallium arsenide is most famously being used in satellites, for instance. And then you've got the crystalline silicon, which achieve pretty good efficiencies and are very widely used. In fact, go back 3-4 years, that pretty much was what PV was all about, but have the disadvantages associated with a fairly weighty and difficult manufacturing technology. At the bottom, you have some fairly speculative areas, organic PV, which includes dye-sensitive cells as well as pure organic materials, and nanomaterials, which right now are kind of out there somewhere and may have some real potential later on. And you have amorphous silicon, which until very recently was really what thin film PV was all about, had lots of nice things associated with it with regard to thin filmness, thinness, I suppose, but really inherently low efficiency. And you know, these numbers are all over the place. People quote different numbers, but these are sort of relative numbers, and I'm trying to make a general point. What you have in the middle is really two technologies. One is cadmium telluride, which is highly commercialized, although from one firm, from First Solar, and the other one is CIGS, which we're talking about today. And that's sort of an area that you really need to remember as we go through all this. Essentially what's being said by the CIGS people is cadmium telluride has done incredibly well. First Solar is really the first thin film company to be up there in terms of size with the crystalline silicon companies, and CIGS may be what's next after cadmium telluride. Now that's my wording, but it's sort of an image that I want you to keep in mind as we move through this. So what we're seeing now, just to give you a sort of potted overview of where CIGS is now, is it probably is the thin film technology with the closest efficiency to crystalline silicon. Cadmium telluride's up there too. The highest thin film PV efficiency, I think, has come from CIGS, which is around 20%, which ain't bad for just the pure cell technology, although that's, of course, a champion cell at NREL. There are more than 26 firms at the end of 2008, and that's actually an underestimate because you also have to take into mind that there are other companies out there that are currently doing amorphous silicon or doing cadmium telluride that are looking at CIGS as basically the next generation PV. So that's quite a lot of firms for one of the smaller areas in PV in terms of actual production. And that's the point. Production of CIGS is actually at low levels and probably less than we would have expected a few years ago. The more ambitious stories that were being told about CIGS for 3 years ago haven't quite panned out. While the technologies for manufacturing crystalline and amorphous silicon PV are pretty stable and established, there's a certain amount of proprietariness to them, but they're all fairly similar. As we're about to see, and I'll spend some fair amount of time on this, manufacturing materials technology for CIGS really has yet to stabilize. Nonetheless, we're expecting $400 million module market by 2011.